Thomas, just to address that question, because, I mean, it is true that Mélenchon at the left front didn't get as many votes as expected, but it is a vote to the extreme left that we did see at just over 10%. But the surprise here, it's Marine Le Pen and the National Front, 18%. How much of a concern is that going to be for other European leaders with elections coming up all over?
Well, it's obviously not good news. What has happened, I think, is that Marine Le Pen's strategy of sanitizing not so much the policy content, but the policy framing, the rhetoric of the party and her own party and her own, when compared with her father's rhetoric, has worked. Her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, former party leader, is well known for making anti-Semitic jokes, for flirting with statements which suggested some kind of proximity perhaps to the Nazi period. In some ways, he keeps at it. She's completely broken with that. So she's trying to reformat her rhetoric, make it more mainstream, and that's worked. She's moved into mainstream territory, broadened her outreach in regional terms in France without losing the hardcore, extreme right-wing protest vote. That is a source of concern for the future in French politics.
Well, certainly in French policy, but what about in other, the fact that you've got so many people concerned about austerity, concerned about rising unemployment? Look at Spain, you've got 24% unemployment, enormous youth unemployment. Also, there must be a concern that there's a possibility of extremist parties coming up all over Europe.
There is that concern, but on the other hand, we should not lose sight of two things. One is that whereas since the beginning of the Eurozone crisis, governments across the Eurozone, on the whole, when they stood for election, have tended to lose the election. The voters haven't returned extreme parties into government, but the traditional mainstream opposition parties. That's what happened in Ireland, that's what happened in Spain. We haven't seen a tidal wave of, if you like, far-right, anti-European, xenophobic parties in Europe. We've seen it in some countries, but in a country like Finland, the true Finns seem to see their bubble bursting to some extent. We're seeing it now in France, but it's nothing new in France. The far-right was deeply entrenched in the fabric of French politics for more than 2 decades now.
Certainly, looking at the polls, it does look as if, Francois Hollande, the socialist contender, is going to be able to move into the Élysée Palace after the elections in 2 weeks. One of the concerns, though, is his attitude towards the fiscal compact, his rhetoric about the European Central Bank. That must be causing some concern about whether he's going to be able to get a smooth working relationship with Angela Merkel.
The Germans are braced for a difficult beginning to the relationship, and Francois Hollande is going to make good on his campaign announcement that he wants to reorient the political framework for Eurozone governance and Eurozone policy towards a less single-minded focus on austerity and a stronger focus on growth. That said, if you look at the way the economy has been doing, particularly in the southern periphery of the Eurozone, if you look at the trouble Mario Monti is in, who's had to scale down the speed of consolidation, Spain, same situation. It is not at all impossible that if Francois Hollande plays his cards well, he won't be alone in Europe. And the Germans know that they have to keep France as their most important partner, and Francois Hollande knows that the opposite is true as well.
Which brings me to that whole subject of the fiscal compact. I mean, there's a pretty much a good understanding that he's not going to be able to actually open up that compact and renegotiate it. But there is the idea of a growth addendum. What exactly do you think could be proposed or put forward that could be accepted by the Montis of the world?
He's come up with 4 points, and interesting enough, he hasn't said it so much to the domestic audience. He's said it in an interview with foreign journalists, messaging to the financial markets and to foreign leaders. 4 points, very quickly. Leveraging the European Investment Bank to be able for it to give more credit to small and medium-sized enterprises, using the scope in the EU budget, project bond finance, as he calls it, big infrastructure projects, and finally making the European Financial Stability Mechanism more like a bank in the sense that the ECB would then be empowered to extend credit to it directly. So that's not a renegotiation of the fiscal compact, but that's adding something to it which he can then sell as an overall policy framework.
Certainly concrete ideas that may certainly get support from Mario Monti's, from some of the southern member states, Thomas Klau from the Council on European Foreign Relations. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.